8:42. Still to come on the program, we'll talk about the competition for Amazon's second headquarters. That's coming up in a few minutes. But up next, after examining the top NHL coaches of all time in a previous book, my next guest has followed up with The Art of the Dealers, the NHL's greatest general managers. Matthew DiBiase is a member of the Society for International Hockey Research and works for the National Archives at Philadelphia, where he handles reference requests from businesses, politicians, foreign citizens. He also writes on a regular basis for Inside Hockey magazine, and his newest book, as we say, is The Art of the Dealers, the NHL's greatest general managers, and Mr. DiBiase joins us on the line. Good evening to you.
Good evening, John.
Appreciate you joining us. Following on the heels, as I mentioned, of a previous book where you looked at the NHL coaches, I guess this was an obvious extension for you to take a look at essentially their bosses. What was the genesis behind this book?
Simple curiosity on my part, because like my first book, Bench Bosses, the NHL's Coaching Leap, which came out 2 years ago, it's the first of its kind. No one has ever, as far as I have determined, no one has ever attempted to actually rate and rank general managers of the four major sports, hockey, basketball, football, and baseball, using an analytical method. I mean, there have been books, biographies about general managers and all that, and some general managers have put out their memoirs, but no one has ever attempted to rate and rank general managers of a major sport using an analytical method. So literally, it's like my first book, it's a groundbreaking effort. And it arose from my own personal curiosity. During the last NHL lockout, 2012 and 13, I was, there was the threat of there not being any season. So I was talking to my boss at Inside Hockey, Kevin Greenstein, and asking him, how about I try this series, on the 50 greatest general managers? And I figured that would fill the space, while the lockout was taking place. And he said, yeah, go for it. So basically, it was just some basic rudimentary articles. I had done, it was like using an earlier method, not the final version that you see now, but it was sort of a different method. I was doing this series of 50 articles. So for for 50 straight weeks, I'm just churning out the stuff. It's like 2-3 page articles. And it ended, in 2013. And then after my first book came out in 2015, I was wondering what to do. And my agent told me, why don't you take those articles? He knew about it ahead of time. He said, why don't you flesh it out and make another book out of it? So that's exactly what I did. Starting in July last year, for 1 year solid, I started fleshing out those articles, updating them, and also I revamped my rating method, doing some general tweaking, just expanding the plus and minus categories, to reflect, superb, efforts or very bad efforts, just to create greater delineation between, the truly exceptional from, the exceptional and all that. And I ran it through.
You talked about the rating system. Briefly walk us through the process that you use to essentially rate these general managers.
It's a sliding scale from 1 to 8 points. For plus points, it's sliding scale from 1 to 8 points. You get X amount of points if you just have a winning season. Or you get 2 points if it's like above 550. You get X amount of points if it's like for getting in the playoffs, finishing in first place, reaching the Stanley Cup Finals, and then winning the Stanley Cup. And it's like 8 points if you have your winning percentage is above 800, because that's truly exceptional effort. Whereas on the minus side, if you really have a horrific season, like if your winning percentage is like 200% or only 100%, then that's like adding on extra points, like 5 and 6 extra points, because that really shows a real abysmal effort. And it's just like you get you're docked 1 point, for not making the playoffs, 2 points if you have a losing season, and so on down the line. And I ran every single NHL general manager from 1917 up to the end of the 2015-16 season through that method, and the end result is the art of the dealer is the NHL's greatest general managers. It's a sliding scale, and every time you reach a certain level of success or failure, you are assessed those points, either plus or minus points. So it's based on a plus-minus system.
What makes a great hockey, or specifically NHL general manager?
When I did 17 hours of interviews with many of the former and active general managers today, like Lou Lamoriello of Toronto, Harry Sinden, Doug Armstrong of St. Louis, Doug Wilson of San Jose, and if there's one common theme, it's that they all want the widest possible spectrum of debate and analysis from their subordinates and their staff, from their scouts, from their assistant GMs. They don't want yes men. What they want is a mind to match, a true challenge. In other words, why should we go after this? Why should we draft this top prospect, or why we shouldn't draft that top prospect? Should we trade for this person? Or, as Lou Lamoriello said, some of the greatest trades he ever made were the trades he didn't make. He didn't make. Should we sign this free agent, or shouldn't we sign this free agent? And encouraging that broad spectrum of debate, being challenged. In other words, why should we go after this person? Why should should we or shouldn't we? He said that really maintains success and productivity, and you're not resting on your laurels, and you're getting the maximum out of your personnel, not just the players and the coaches and all that, but also your scouts and your assistant GMs. It's truly a team effort in that sense. It's always challenging, always setting the bar higher, and that was the common theme I got from like Lou Lamoriello, Doug Armstrong, Doug Wilson, what Harry Sinden was telling me, and Cliff Fletcher, who helped build the Calgary Flames to their 1989 Stanley Cup triumph, and also tried to help the Toronto Maple Leafs. I mean, those were commonalities.
You're with KW Magazine on FM 98.5. CKWR. Our guest is the author of The Art of the Dealers, the NHL's greatest general managers. Matthew DiBiase is joining us. Have most NHL general managers played the game actively, even perhaps at the NHL level?
Some did. Craig Patrick did. Let's see. Doug Wilson did. I think Ken Holland had a brief cup of coffee at the NHL level, or if not the NHL, certainly in the AHL, in the minors. Mark Bergvin did. But some of the other ones, like Irving Grundman, he never played a single minute in the NHL. He owned bowling alleys. He became he succeeded Sam Pollock as general manager of the Montreal Canadiens. Like Tommy Gorman, who during the first 25 years in the NHL's existence was one of its greatest general managers. He never played a single minute in the NHL, or even at the lower levels. He was like one time he was a page in the Canadian Parliament. He worked for a newspaper. He never played. It's not a criteria. Being a NHL player is not the sole determining factor of being a great general manager. I mean, Keith Allen, I think, only had played for one brief season, yet he was the Flyers' greatest general manager ever. Bobby Clark was a living legend and a Hall of Fame player. I mean, he was like an exception to the rule. Just to that, Pierre Lacroix. He never played at the NHL level. I think he played like in junior, but he was a player agent who just went over to the other side and became one of the great general managers in NHL history. And why he isn't in the Hockey Hall of Fame as a builder is beyond my comprehension.
Now, once you put through all of the general managers through your system and applied your rating criteria, who came out on top? Who's, in your opinion, the top of the top?
The late Sam Pollock from the Montreal Canadiens, who managed the team from 1964 to 1978 in only 14 seasons, he was able to outdo late Jack Adams, who served for 35 years with the Red Wings in terms of managerial career value. I mean, it was just extraordinary. I mean, he managed one of the greatest dynasties in NHL history at Montreal. I mean, he was there, when they were doing those 4 straight, he was there for 3 of those 4 victories, Stanley Cup triumphs there. He built, the players he not either drafted or signed or recruited could fill a whole wing of the Hockey Hall of Fame. He recruited managerial talent. He gave Scotty Bowman his gig in Montreal. Claude Ruel, who are featured in my first book, the 50 greatest head coaches of all time. It was just absolutely dazzling success. And everything he touched turned to gold. His ability to get the number 1 draft picks, simply trading his second or third line stars to teams like the California Seals for their number 1 picks. That's how he got Guy Lafleur and others. He was just a managerial genius. I mean, the Montreal farm system was just absolutely bursting with talent. I mean, they had talent they could burn. They could just trade away anywhere just to get even greater players. I mean, his greatness is just so self-evident, and it's just amazing. And the respect.
Who rounds out the top 5 for you?
Okay, number 2 was Jack Adams, who managed the Detroit Red Wings from 1927 to 62. He, for a time, like the mid-50s to 1978, he was the greatest general manager of all time. Number 3 was the late Frank Selke, who was Sam Pollock's predecessor. I mean, he literally built the Canadiens dynasty from 46 to 64. I mean, for 10 straight years, the Montreal Canadiens were in the Stanley Cup Finals from 51 to 60. That will never be broken. Number 4 is Ken Holland, the present-day general manager of the Detroit Red Wings. He replaced Jim Devellano in 97. I mean, for a 12-year period, the Red Wings were the strongest team in the NHL from 97 to 2009. And right now, he is the greatest active general manager in the game today. Number 5 was the late Conn Smythe, who literally built the Toronto Maple Leafs, gave them their name, gave them their traditions, and just, made them literally the flagship franchise for English Canada, up until, he finally sold the team. You've got Harry Sinden, Glenn Sather with Edmonton, Lou Lamoriello, present-day general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs. He gave me a magnificent interview last summer. Fantastic. I mean, really detailed. And he didn't even need to go in the NHL to become a Hockey Hall of Famer, because before he became general manager of the New Jersey Devils, he developed Hockey East and NCAA hockey. I mean, he was highly instrumental in that. He could have been a Hall of Famer for that, but no, he craved greater challenges and joined the NHL and literally converted the New Jersey Devils from literally the abyss of the NHL to Stanley Cup champions in 1995. Doug Wilson with San Jose, David Poyle with Nashville, who made it to the finals last season. Pete Chiarelli of Edmonton are featured here. Doug Armstrong of St. Louis. He gave me a great interview. Great man. Great explanation about his own career and also his working for Bob Gainey and Bobby Clark, because he was a subordinate to both men at the Dallas Stars. You got George McPhee. I mean, just before his first season started with Vegas, who are doing very good. He gave me a lovely interview about his work with the Washington Capitals and trying to build the Vegas Golden Knights from scratch. Great guy.
Some wonderful names there for sure. I have about 30 seconds. Obviously, some fantastic names from hockey's past. The game has changed quite a bit. How much more difficult is it to be a general manager today than it was perhaps in the era of the 6 teams?
Well, you got dealing with the salary cap. Just always trying to figure out the cap. I mean, you win the Stanley Cup, and almost always there has to be some. Stan Bowman twice had to do a cap purge because while retaining your core and all that. That's always the great challenge. I mean, that's the challenge facing Jim Rutherford with Pittsburgh today. I mean, he talked about that, how to retain your core while dealing with the salary cap and all that, and trying not to get too loaded up like the Flyers are, who are always every year trying to struggle to free up cap space. It's always the great challenge today.
Wonderful. Matthew, it's a fascinating look at a very, very important cog in the success of any NHL team, their GM. Thanks so much for sharing some time with us tonight. Continued success.
Thank you, and God bless you, John.
All the best. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Matthew DiBiase is a member of the Society for International Hockey Research. He is also works for the National Archives at Philadelphia and writes on a regular basis for Inside Hockey magazine. His newest book is titled The Art of the Dealers, the NHL's Greatest General Managers. KW Magazine on FM 98.5 CKWR. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you. Okay.
That was great. All the best to you.
Take care, John. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.